Hey everyone, I'm Jack,
And I'm Alex.
and today we're going to be ranking the bosses of Bluepoint's PlayStation 5 Demon's Souls remake from worst to best. We always thought the original Demon's Souls was a solid game that was dampened slightly by primitive AI and design. With this in mind, the devs at Bluepoint outdid themselves, going above and beyond replenishing and enhancing not only the game but its bosses as well. Before we hop in, it's worth noting that we won't be counting Old King Doran since he's more of a tricky NPC than a standalone boss, kinda like the Bloody Crow from Bloodborne. With that aside, strap in and be prepared to comment. This is gonna be one wild ride.
There's an old saying that if you have nothing nice to say, then don't say anything at all. But I can't just skip a whole entry for the video now, can I? I'm just gonna say it right off the bat. This boss fucking sucks. After the frustrating slog that is 2-1, they don't even have the decency to give you a good boss. This thing is a failure in basically every conceivable category to me. Appearance-wise, it's just a spider, but big, and I guess armored, although I don't really see it. Its attacks are all annoying. For starters, the webs are dumb bullshit design. They don't do much damage, but slow you to a crawl and open you up for a guaranteed fireball to the gut. They aren't too hard to dodge, but it's still just a nuisance. The oil spill attack looks great in the remake, but it mainly serves to waste your time. Unless you really like watching the fancy next-gen fire effects, this is just 15 seconds of nothing happening. Its melee attacks are nothing special either. Just block or walk backwards and hack away at what I can only assume is its crotch. It's also way too tanky for how early you likely fight it, which makes it drag out. This fight is a miserable, irredeemable heap of that is actively unpleasant to experience. Whoever designed this thing 11 years ago is at best delusional and at worst an outright malevolent dickhead. Sadly, the next entry is hardly any better.
To the surprise of absolutely nobody, Dragon God is the second worst boss in Demon's Souls. Putting this stinker here was easy as cut and butter because Alex and I had almost the exact same experience with him on both the PS3 and PS5 versions. It is quite alarming that he was equally as bad in a multi-million-dollar remake as he was in a 2008 low-budget, small-dev game, but let me elaborate. Just as the original, he was heavily marketed and plastered everywhere in the cinematic trailers and advertisements. Also like the original, he is a terrible, overhyped, hard-hitting, unfair waste of time and is by far the worst of the 5 archdemons. To get it out of the way, yeah, he does look pretty cool. I'll even go as far to say this fight is one of my favorite looking in the entire game, with an asterisk. I say this because even though he looks better and the surrounding volcano looks better, the arena and specifically the pillars you hide behind have no tells as they all look the same and make this a whole lot more unfair than it used to be. Figuring out the safe spots was like trying to find a needle in a haystack and it caused for some very frustrating deaths. It's also a double whammy with his broken eyesight hitboxes, and it doesn't help that you're good as dead if he spots you, meaning you gotta restart the whole thing. By the way, that was just a pre-fight, but fair warning, the core portion is no different. I really wish they changed this boss's mechanics because smashing through rubble and firing 2 ballistas is not my idea of a good time. It truly seemed like one of those things they could have changed gameplay. Wait. Do you hear that? What is that? Is that really heavy breathing? Oh my god, a second phase! That's right, there is a second phase, except this time he takes in gigantic breaths to stall you from hitting his horn, and after that bore of a fight, it's just adding salt to the wound. Funny story, I actually died to surprisingly dangerous breath on my first playthrough, although we didn't have any recording software, nor did we even consider running a YouTube channel at that point. Also, the PS3 randomly broke down a week later, so that was my final memory of him for a while. Either way, the Dragon God is awful. He sucks, and he sucks hard. I can gladly say we did it though, as we're past the worst of the worst, but I can't overlook this shockingly bad rerun of an absolute shit show.
At number 16, we have a blob that does absolutely nothing. The last 2 bosses were just so bad that there is literally more enjoyment to be had hacking away at this ugly clump of sludge. I guess saying he does nothing isn't entirely true though. He awkwardly lurches in random directions and prattles on about demons and how you shouldn't put the old one back to sleep. If plot bosses are your thing, you might get more of a kick out of this than we did, but as our next entry will show, lore alone isn't enough to win us over.
Remember when I said this?
And be prepared to comment.
Yeah. Hopefully we aren't opening a Pandora's box with this placement, but before you load your guns and light your torches, hear us out. So, I think Souls lore is pretty cool. It's fun and adds emotional depth to an extent, but the issue for me is that it's a background story. It's just really hard to come to terms and raise a boss that's not enjoyable from a gameplay standpoint whatsoever solely because their story is interesting. With that out of the way, I hope we can all agree that the actual boss fight sucks. Thank God they nerfed Garl Vinland's monstrous health pool, or at least it seems that way, because I think I could have written a novel in the time it took to beat him in the original. It still can take quite a while because he turtles behind that shield like no one else, and it can get infuriating. Also, the arena is terrible. It's infested with these disgusting looking babies who not only deal an outrageous load of health, but also give you the Plague on impact. For those of you wondering, Plague is Demon Souls' version of Dark Souls 2's Toxic, and might do more damage, but it's hard to tell. No matter what, it was an awful design choice to fill the arena with Plague Lakes, especially because the only safe place you can fight him on is a pretty slim ledge, in which you take one wrong roll and you're going to be munching grass like a cow to stave off the poison. I'm done ranting about Garl, but I do find it interesting that Estrella is just a sitting duck and actually kills herself if you beat Garl, technically the only Souls boss to do so. I've actually never seen footage of someone killing her outright, so I'd be interested in what happens. And I know I ragged about the story, but it is interesting that she's a priest for all of the disparaged people of the Valley of Defilement, which is why she's above the previous three, but that's about all the praise I can give, because this was one hell of a snooze fest.
Leechmonger. This guy is all over the place in other rankings I've seen. Most think he's a cakewalk and a few think he's difficult. This 100% comes down to when you fight him though. I tried doing 5-1 as my second level just to see how he was if I fought him early, and he actually kicked my ass. He can out-heal pretty much anything you do to him, and his tells are incredibly unclear since he's just a mass of squirming leeches. He could be readying a seizure slam or preparing a massive healing surge, and I couldn't guess which to save my life. If you fight him later, however, like I decided to after he pissed me off early on, he goes down with a whimper. He can be fun to slap around, I guess, but if you actually fight him in a state where you have to worry about his attacks, he's an annoying bastard. He at least has an interesting arena and concept, so he beats out that shield-loving pussy Garl Vinland.
I guess making an army of demons to run over Boletaria really took a toll on this guy because his boss fight is nothing special. The idea behind the old monk is super cool as depending on whether you're online or offline, you fight either a real invader or an NPC. Think of it as Demon Souls Half-Light, except a hell of a lot less annoying and a hell of a lot more uninteresting. The online version is similar to Half-Light in that it depends heavily on latency and player skill. Personally, I haven't run into anyone beyond my general PvP level, so it's enjoyable, and since the invaders connect to your server, they're always going to receive the short end of the stick. On the other hand, the offline version reminds me of one of those early game NPC invaders from Dark Souls 3, as it's pretty light hitting and low health, but also swift attack and roll wise. Both the online and offline versions have randomly spawning homing soul arrows that deal hefty damage, but the arena has chairs around it that can actually block them if at the right angle. I respect the little details done to the old King of Latria, but overall, this once powerful ruler's final stand is just boring.
I honestly think this boss is okay. It gets a lot of flack for basically being prototype Pinwheel, but it has some neat ideas I've never seen replicated later on in Souls. For example, she has electric floor traps all over the arena that set off if you step on them. These things will absolutely obliterate your health if you get caught in one, but usually not to the point of death. The pillars in the arena make for decent crowd control measures, and add to the look of the room, which is already really neat. So I know Jack didn't care for this at all, but I thought having to kill that guy on the upper level who otherwise revives her infinitely was a cool one-time mechanic. That being said, I can certainly see where it would frustrate players who didn't know about it beforehand, as there's no obvious pointer telling you he's out there. I know I joked about caring next to none about the plot earlier, but truthfully I am pretty into that stuff, and I think it fits in well with the lore of the Tower of Latria, which is possibly my favorite area in any Souls game. That said, she's still nothing jaw-dropping. Her main attack is shooting spells at you and cloning herself, with the real one shooting a larger blast than the rest. If you haven't ever played Demon Souls before, just think of this as Crystal Sage meets Pinwheel, and you'll have a pretty good idea what it's like. Not too special, but I wouldn't call it unpleasant either.
The first boss Alex and I really disagree on is Phalanx. Well, I guess we disagree more on the level. Where Alex and I contradict is that I think Phalanx is assisted greatly by the Boltarian Palace, aka 1-1. In my opinion, it's the best level in Demon's Souls, and Phalanx is like a cherry on top. In contrast, Alex thinks of 1-1 as a decent layout, but nothing that stands out in particular, which I respectfully disagree on. Either way, it's cool how he's weak to fire, as throughout the level you can gather Turpentine and Fire Bombs, which in turn can be used to chip away at his guards. 2 to 3 of them will do the trick, but I prefer the old hack and slash because it's really satisfying watching like a dozen little health bars get sliced into chunks, but whichever route you choose, it's fairly easy. That being said, Phalanx admittedly does have a lot of guards, which can slice away at your health pretty quick, but once you take them out, you win, as Phalanx doesn't attack. She runs away in fear, and it's pretty funny watching this big goofy clump of goop squirm away. It's also a pretty neat lore reference. She's the demonified version of Longbow Ulan, a skilled but cowardly archer who only went to battle behind the protection of her loyal knights. She was too much of a coward to go solo, and just like Phalanx, she didn't have the wit to take on a warrior on level terms. A very cool nod to the lore for sure, and a solid placement for a pretty cool boss.
The tutorial boss being this high might sound weird, but hear us out. For one, he looks awesome, especially in the remake. 2, his arena from a layout perspective is bleak, but aesthetically is awesome too. And lastly, he's decently fun to fight. He's pretty similar to the Asylum Demon, the tutorial boss in Dark Souls, but I'd say better, mainly due to cool design. He can claim credit for inventing the famous FromSoft booty stomp move too, which is a pretty high honor. As always, it's best to just stick to his rear and chop away, but the inability of most people to beat him in the tutorial goes to show that clearly he hits most people eventually. That also doesn't help that his damage to player HP ratio is off the charts. No matter your starting build, you will get 2-shot or even 1-shot, and it can get pretty lengthy taking him down. There really isn't much I have to say on Vanguard beyond that. Besides that, he has no notably annoying aspects to him, and looks really good. Fine by me.
The Adjudicator at 9? We can explain. My favorite part of the whole spectacle was the arena. It's short, but did the remake a huge favor because it was quite the shock to see this Lord of Lard look so human. It actually kind of scared me, as in the same vein as Vanguard, he looked extremely cartoonish in the original, but hyper-realistic in the modernized version. The realism in this fight added some atmosphere, and the music is a nice touch. It reminds me of The Mandalorian a bit, which for the record is a great compliment. The fight itself is also pretty interesting. It works with a weak spot mechanic where you have to hit it a few times and then he gets knocked to the ground. Once he's down, you hit the Golden Crow, which I thought was an erroneously bright crown until Alex explained the lore. Apparently that Golden Crow is the master of the Adjudicator, and his job was to judge the dead. If the subject was guilty of evil, the Adjudicator would open the gates to the underworld, whereas sinners would be devoured. This is how he gained the blubbery stature you see him in today, which is interesting but confused the hell out of me for a really long time. Back to the fight, the Adjudicator is like the Tower Knight in that his head takes massive damage. His weak spot isn't the hardest to find either. It's a gigantic blade surrounded by a bloody gash. It would have made it a lot more interesting to have either multiple weak spots or have the one be harder to find. No matter which way you put it, it's a unique mechanic, and I wish there were more bosses like this in Souls. All in all, I think the Adjudicator is deserving of the appreciation he gets and earns his rightful spot at number 9.
This guy is pretty solid for how early in the game you fight him. Jack and I generally agreed on our placement of him, although he likes the archers being there, which I always found to be sort of irritating. Other than that, I don't have many issues. This is yet another fight I felt greatly benefited from the remake. Clearer attacks were nice, and I found myself having a lot less trouble with the hitboxes than I did in the original. Busting up his ankles until soul steam or whatever shoots out is pretty satisfying, but even better is beating up his head when he falls over. I never thought about this till now, but he actually has the same beatdown mechanic as the Adjudicator, who is widely considered to be a lot worse. I'd credit the Tower Knight's much swifter and more engaging attack pool for that, but both are solid in their own way. He's also pretty intimidating due to his size. As neat as the classic knight vs knight kind of fights are, I also enjoy a good spectacle every now and then, and the Tower Knight is no exception. By spectacle, I mean anything other than that dumb piece of dragon god. That aside, I think the Tower Knight is pretty good, and is only really held back by difficulty restrictions for early game, which is good design anyways in respects to progression.
I know for a fact you guys have been waiting for him, and I hear ya. Alex doesn't agree, but the true reason he thinks of this poop chucking dirtball so highly is because of how painfully bad the Leechmonger Archstone / 5-2 is. Having yet another essentially free checkpoint was great, but I think it magnifies this fight. That being said, Dirty Colossus is a lot of fun. It's not too challenging, but does pack a bit of a punch and also looks really cool. Mechanically, he's almost the exact same as Leechmonger, as if you get hit by him, you're going to get engulfed, except this time in bugs. Luckily, there's an awesome touch in the arena design through torches that burn the bugs when you get close enough to them. His moveset is also very similar to Leechmonger, but a lot fairer due to clear telegraphed attacks and a wider array of moves, such as his dookie throws. Overall, I think this guy is pretty good. Better than Tower Knight? No way in hell. But hey, not too far behind either.
Truth be told, I used to like this guy for one main reason. On his first playthrough back on the PS3, Jack died to this guy like 6 times for some reason, and I thought that was hilarious, since he really isn't that hard. It made it that much better that 4-2 is a super annoying level to trek through to get back, and he died a bunch there too. Although recently I realized the old hero is pretty good merit-wise as well. Him being blind is a pretty unique idea that leads to interesting and varied fighting techniques among the player base. I went the Thief's Ring route, which almost made me feel guilty. It was like fighting a cripple in a deathmatch after tossing him out of his wheelchair. I just cleaved away at his big glowing ass cheeks while he blindly groped around the room and swung his huge sword at empty air. Not to say he's totally incompetent though, he can hit you if you get careless, and he packs a decent punch. If you get too carried away attacking him while he charges his AoE, he can kill you pretty easily. I've already gushed over the graphical updates enough for one video, but I gotta mention how great his arena looks too. It's got neat lighting kinda like Vanguard's, and I like how the hero's body is on the wall. If you fight him fair, he's a lot more formidable, and probably a bit more fun too. One of the most creative bosses in Souls for sure, and that's actually a good thing in the old hero's case.
A shocker for sure, we got Old King Alon at number 5. Truth be told, I don't particularly love this boss. Personally, he was the best in the original as it felt swift in comparison to most, as he had solid animations, fast attacks, and was difficult due to limited rolling and iframes. That being said, the remake for some reason made this living puppet feel way less special, and if anything made me realize more flaws than strengths. For one, he's not nearly as difficult as I remember. It felt way easier with omnidirectional rolling, and his big hitters like the wind attack felt slight to dodge. There's one specific attack that everyone should be wary of, however, that attack being the Soul Sucker. It can catch you off guard as it's quick and is a piercing attack similar to penetrators. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention it, but it's called the Soul Sucker because it sucks away your previous soul level. This can be killer, but usually most people fight him endgame, so taking away 1 point from 40 strength isn't going to do too much harm. Otherwise, the ex-king of Boletaria is just a knight who's a little faster than most and is also packing a badass sword.
The Penetrator is pretty much the prototype for all future knight vs knight fights in Soulsborne. And for what it's worth, he does it well. He moves pretty smoothly, and it actually matters which direction you roll into his swings, which discourages mindless roll spamming. He also has a pretty badass entrance. You walk in expecting that stupid fat f*** to summon another lackey, only for him to get skewered from behind by the Penetrator's huge ass sword. That was pretty awesome. You get a few seconds of the dude gurgling and freaking out before being tossed aside like a piece of trash. From there you just dodge his swings and counter while he misses. The only issue with this fight is simply that it's too easy. I don't think I've ever met someone who's died to this guy, especially not if they summoned Bior. That just turns it into a one-sided massacre, since he can only really attack one person at a time, and usually only focuses on Bior anyways. He doesn't do much damage, so in the event that he does hit you, it's pretty easy to roll away and munch some grass, or sniff it, or whatever. Not really sure what exactly you do with it. I think it'd have helped if he had some power beyond just skilled swordsmanship. Later versions of this style of fight made use of this to great effect. For example, the Smelter Demon has passive heat damage, the Dragon Slayer armor has lightning, Sir Alon has curse, and so on. If he had something like this, it would make him both stand out more and pose a lot more of a threat. As is, he still claims a respectable 4th place spot on our list.
Flamelurker is great. Let me get that out of the way. I think all the top 3 are fantastic bosses in their own right, and it was really hard putting one of my favorite bosses in Soulsborne here. And you can take my word, Alex and I spent nearly double the time going back and forth on these 3, and specifically Flamelurker, than the other 15 combined. With that out of the way, I honestly believe Flamelurker falls to 3rd, not because he got beat out, but rather he beat himself. There's too many minor errors to add up, whereas the remaining 2 have little to none in the way of mistakes. I said minor because the only 2 issues I've got are certain spots within the arena with lava that burn away at your health pretty fast, and his AI. The lava is really nitpicky, but the AI's got no excuse because it was already wonky enough, and it looks even crazier than he used to with the updated graphics. Moving on to the positives, the new rolling system benefited this fight greatly. Most, if not all of his attacks are AoEs and were insanely hard to dodge in the original, thus why most thought of him as the hardest in the game. Similar to Old King Allant, omnidirectional rolling makes this a world easier and also way less frustrating. It's still the most intense and fastest fight in the game in my opinion, but it feels a lot more fair with the full 360 degrees of rolling. Also, shout out whoever redesigned him 2 separate times. The original looked the exact same as that treacherous Lost Isles with lava texture, and the first remodel just looked terrible. He looks super badass and terrorizing now, and his appearance fits his fight perfectly. An absolute thrill ride and a total joy from beginning to end.
Jack and I both love the man-eaters, but I was surprised to learn a lot of people don't care for them in particular. The most common complaints I see are that they spend too much time screwing around in the air doing nothing and have moronic baboon AI. I actually kinda like the AI. For me, they didn't spend too much time flying around and generally just swung at me and used their green telekinesis wave attack or whatever that is. I think their unpredictability makes the fight more chaotic in a good way, and the arena is good too. It's not so narrow that falling off happens a lot, contrary to what I hear online. I've never fallen off at all actually, and honestly, if arena size bothers you, then you can just go to the middle section. It also helps that 3-2 is my favorite level in the game, so it's great that it caps off with a boss as good as this. Part of my heavy appreciation is due to that this is yet another boss that started a trend, that being the FromSoft gank battle. As someone who actually likes a good deal of those, I'm thankful for that. Anyways, for some reason they didn't actually gank me too hard, and the second one came in when the first was already on death's door. The second is the exact same as the first, which isn't as interesting, but that's not a big knock to the overall quality. Plot-wise, it's a cool boss too. All the background about them being made by the old monk in a sort of human centipede-y way is pretty nasty. If you check their back, you can see the wings are actually fused on, shown by scorch marks. Their tail also moves independently of them, and sometimes even attacks the man-eater itself, I've heard, although I've never encountered this myself. This is definitely one of my favorite boss fights in the series, although one other still beats it out for the prestigious #1 spot.
Pinch yourself because you're not dreaming. The Storm King is the best boss in Demon's Souls. Alex and I agree that this is by far the best archdemon and the least flawed boss in the game as well. There was nothing glaringly bad about the original version, just mainly how unclear his attacks and tells were. The devs at Bluepoint solved this problem with relative ease, replacing damn near invisible gusts of wind with gigantic glowing spears, complemented with more obvious telegraphs. The Storm King, like many others in this game, has multiple ways of approaching him as well. The easy way is through a tiny little cottage in the back corner of the arena. When inside, you're virtually unhittable, and if you have one special little item called the Sticky Compound Longbow, you might as well start counting your souls before you even enter the fog. On the other hand, you can run up to the heart of the battlefield and grab the Storm Ruler, a wind-controlling sword that charges up and unleashes a powerful blast of air. If you go full airbender for 45 seconds, the fight's over. The Storm King doesn't have a lot of health, but what he's lacking in physicality, his clones make up for. There are a ton of these Storm Beasts, and you need to be as alert as possible to come out unscathed. I also want to praise the updated soundtrack, which in my opinion is vastly superior to the original. This fight is a great showcase of the new OST, carrying a much more intense tone that added a lot more atmosphere. Retrospectively, the Storm King had quite the glow up over 11 years, and the remake did him justice in a way the original simply couldn't. He is part of a very select catalog of perfect Souls bosses and is our definition of top dog Demon's Souls. Thank you guys so much for watching our ranking of the bosses of Bluepoint's PlayStation 5 Demon's Souls remake from worst to best. Soulsborne is our favorite gaming series, and this is just the first boss ranking of 5, so stay on the lookout in the near future for our ranking of the Dark Souls remastered bosses. We hope you guys enjoyed our first video commentating together, and let us know if you like it this way. And with all that said, deuces.